Hello, welcome to part 2 of this diorama build. In this episode, I am going to clad the entire board in plasticard. It's a long and boring process, but it will look really cool when it's finished. Now, you may remember the previous episode, we got all the way to this point where we built the entire structure, laid down all the MDF, screwed it all together. It's had sort of 3 days curing now. It wasn't necessary to leave it 3 days, but I still left it for quite a long time. And the last thing we did was to coat the entire board in a layer of PVA glue. So that is hardened solid now. And the first thing to do before we start cladding this board with styrene, and that's to sand the entire thing back just to make sure we've got a nice level surface to begin our cladding. So to get that underway, I'm going to take the building off, which is pretty secure thanks to its anchor points there. I'm going to take some sandpaper here. I've got 240 grit and I've got a little sanding block, and I'm just going to lightly sand every surface flat in preparation for the cladding. All right, that's a lot better. That's definitely taken the edge off that PVA. Now, a lot of it would have soaked into the MDF, so don't worry about it. It's not like I put it on to take it off again. It has definitely stiffened up the surface, particularly at the front edge. So when you cut MDF, it kind of frays a little bit because it's quite a fibrous material. But when you put that that PVA on it, it kind of hardens it up and really shores up the edge. Ideally, we need a pretty good surface to glue our plasticard to. So it's not like we can use plastic cement. We could use super glue, but we're going to use a lot of super glue. So I'm going to use PVA. So it might take a while between layers to get that secured down. But it's always good to have a nice flat surface to glue against. So I can just feel here that the surface is really smooth now, which is perfect. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work out the orientation of the plasticard and how it needs to go on. Now, instead of showing you a white piece of plastic, which is not very easy to see, I've got a couple of pieces of MDF here, just scrap MDF. And what we want to do is we want to try and make as little work for ourselves as possible. So what I don't want to do is when I lay my plasticard on top of each other, I don't want on the top of the step, I don't want this to be the top of the step and then my plasticard for the front part of the step to come up the front there, because then you'll be able to see the seam on the front. So that just means more work. It means I've got to do more filling and more sanding so you don't see that detail. Now you could argue that, you know, when they build steps, you know, they might do in that orientation. Well, they might do. But I imagine in my head that they would perhaps build the brickwork underneath and then they put kind of like a facing slab on top. So that's why I want to do it in that orientation. So this bit will go on the front face of the step, and then this will be the actual step that will go on top. And then when we come to do the next section here, this is already down. And then this will go on as the face of the step, which is here. And then this will then go on top of that step. But I am going to start with this really awkward part here. As you can see on the top down, it's a really tricky one to get, this one. The road I'm not going to clad in plasticard because I'm going to use some fine sand to get a bit of a texture on it. So we're going to leave that till last. And then we'll start facing each of these steps. So there's quite a lot of work to do. This will probably take about 2 or 3 hours. And bear in mind that the plasticard that I've brought, it's 2mm plasticard, so it's quite thick and quite difficult to cut. I've got a really decent utility knife or box cutter, depending on where you are in the world, depends what you call that. I will cut all the strips out first, and then I will start to clad it in that particular order. My only issue, of course, is if I hold this up, well, I can top down, I'll show you. My plasticard isn't quite long enough, so I'm going to have to make a join here. It's not ideal. I could have made the diorama the width of the plasticard, but as I said, using that tri-RS I just needed something a little bit, just a little bit beefier to hold the tri-arcs because I didn't want it to be squashed in the diorama, and that's why I had to go for this length. So I will have to join it. Hopefully my joining skills will be okay, and then we'll be able to sand it flat. And then when there is a seam later on, we could use that when we detail it, when we etch the kind of where the slabs come together, which I'll show you later. We're going to make like a V groove, and we can make that one of the grooves. And then if I alternate where I join it each time, then we can then work out a pattern, and then it will just blend in, you won't see it. So the first thing to do, I'm just going to cut a load of 6mm lengths out of the 2mm plastic card, because that is the height of my facing on the step. And then if I get my little caliper out here, we'll use this section. Each step is, let's have a look. It's 13mm, and then I'll then cut strips of 13mm. Obviously I'll cut a larger strip for the steps, the larger steps, but we'll just continue in that fashion. But first of all, I'll start with the fronts of the steps. Now I have just cut my first one because I just want to make sure that it's right. And you'll see that it's quite thick stuff. If you can see that in the top-down camera, it's quite thick. You know, 2mm plastic card is pretty hard to cut. So loads of scoring, nice and steady. It's got a bit of an edge on both sides. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to use my little Games Workshop tool and just scrape it off so it's nice and flat. But I'm just going to offer it up to my step, and that's perfect. So there's just enough there so I can just get the sander on and sand it beautifully flat, which is exactly what I want. So yeah, this is a long process. So there'll just be a massive time lapse of me cutting strips of 6mm 2mm card. With it. Okay, here we go. So that was quite a lot of work getting all that sorted. I've sort of got about 12, 13 of these now, which is more than enough to start getting on with. Problem is the stuff's so thick, you need a lot of pressure, and I really struggled to do it sat down. So obviously you saw me there, I had to stand up and kind of get it cut, but it's a lot easier. Now, there is a lot easier way to do this. If you use that Foamex material, which I talked about in the first video, or you don't have to then clad your entire model in styrene. You can literally just score into it, sand it nicely and flat, and then just score it, which is perfect. Or as we saw in the previous video as well, if you used Mike's method, and that's covering the model in milliput, and then you can kind of carve your steps or your flagstones, whatever you want in. I don't have access to any of those, unfortunately. I've only got the materials I've got. So this is the way I'm going about it. But certainly in the future, when I come to build much larger boards, I will probably use the CNC machine to cut the V groove into my flagstones. But the only problem with that is because using the CNC machine, you get such a uniformed cut. It's very difficult to kind of pare that back and make it look a bit weathered. So in a way, you know, I know for a fact that these aren't bang on 6mm. They're kind of, you know, 5.95 or, you know, 6.01 or something. But when you put it together, it will kind of look a bit worn and it will be slightly uneven, which you would expect a staircase in this kind of environment to be like. So it won't be a bad thing. All we need to do is just make sure we've got roughly the right height, and when it goes together, it sands together really nicely. So each layer goes on quite comfortably. So I'm quite confident I've got enough of these now. I'm going to now just cut a shape out ready for that triangular piece for the corner curb. Okay, nice little trick there, just using the calipers just to score the lines in. Just makes things a little bit easier. Okay. And that is perfect. It's a tiny bit big, but that's okay. That gives us a little bit of wiggle room to sand everything down. So really happy with how that's gone in. So I'll do this one live on the camera for you. And then I will do the rest of it as it's sped up, because it is going to take a long time. So I don't know if you can see that. I'll get a photo of this and overlay it, but there's sort of a burr on the edge of each of those pieces that I've cut. So we just need to knock that down. Now you can use a sandpaper, no problem at all. I'm just using this Games Workshop mold line remover because it just does it so efficiently and so quickly and leaves a really nice finish. You could use the back of a knife if you want, but they're a bit cumbersome. You could take the blade out if you want and just use the blade to scrape it down, but sometimes I think they take off perhaps a little bit more than you need, whereas this, it's a blunt edge, but it works really, really well. I love this tool, particularly when preparing plastic models. If you use a bit of super fine plastic cement as well, pop that on. If you've got a mold line you need to fill, just run that along the seam which you're trying to get rid of, and then just use this little sucker to run it over. It is beautiful. So a little bit of cleanup work to do on these. It's not too bad. Just want to take the edge off. You know, I'm sure you've used plasticard before. You know, it's a wondrous material. You can make absolutely anything from it. It's so good. You know, it's that classic line, isn't it? You're limited by your imagination, which in my case is quite a lot. So we're just cutting strips. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's quite nice. I mean, if I really wanted to, I could give it a blast on the old sandpaper, but remember what I said, you know, if it's a little bit out, it all adds to the texture of it. No, we're not looking for absolute perfection. Okay, so the first thing is I'm not going to waste all of my material here, so I'll try and move it into the top down for you. And bear in mind, we're cutting at an angle, so we do have to go, if you can see that on the top down, we do have to go a little bit over the edge here to make sure we get a flush cut, because we want the front side to meet the edge of this, because we're going to cut at a diagonal. So the first cut is the most important, or the deepest. I don't know where that's tracks from, but I know it's from a song. It's really tricky to cut this. So actually, do you know what? I'm going to cut this side first. I'm going to leave myself a little gap here. And I'm just going to take the knife and just cut it down there. I'm going to stand up to give myself a bit of better position. Yeah, that's real nice. I'm going to run a little bit of sandpaper on there. Yeah, that's fantastic. Great. Now, important cut. Make sure you're lined up. You know, ultimately, if you don't get it 100%, we can fill it later because we're going to edge this and then we can fill it with green stuff or plaster or something, or we can put a little bit of stone and rock over it and cover it up. So it's not a major if it's not, you know, 100% perfect. So don't worry too much. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little hobby saw. It'll be so much easier to cut that. As if by magic, I've got my hobby saw to hand here. So again, if you can see this on the top down, I'll try and move it into the middle a little bit more for you. We're just going to keep that contour there. We're just going to try and cut down about there. It doesn't need a lot chopping off it. And again, we can refine it with the sandpaper. See, now I've got my angle. I'm just going to take that off so it's easier to cut. Yeah, I mean, the other thing you could do, you can just sand it as well if you don't want to cut it with a hobby saw or a knife. And if you sand it, it'll allow you to get a much more of a precision angle. Let's have a look. Oh, we can go loads more. And the other thing we could do is we can offer up our piece here. Yeah, look, that's even better actually. Now I can mark it on here. Just quite roughly. Now if I take that off, it'll be a bit easier to cut with the hobby knife or box cutter. Wow, that's a bit wild, that one. The other thing you could do is you could glue it all in place, and then when it's thoroughly dry, you could just take like a little hand sander to it or a piece of sandpaper and then just sand it flush. So whichever works for you. There's loads of ways of doing the same job, you know. And again, there's a lot of fiddling just to get it right. I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to put it in place because it's a little bit tricky to get it right. But first of all, I've got to clean this up. Yeah, that's real nice. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get some plastic cement and I'm going to glue these two together on that leading edge, like that. And then I will PVA glue it in place as well. So that'll just help hold the whole thing in. That'll take care of that quite nicely. So just making sure it all fits. All right, we've got the tools of the trade here. I brought super glue just in case, but I'm hoping plastic cement will do the job. Put a nice. We're not worried about this sticking to the wood either, so we can be quite liberal with it really. So obviously glue both sides. And then pop the two together. I'm just going to run another bead along there. There we go. And the good thing about using plastic cement is it does give you a little bit of working time. And even when it's, you know, it's glued to its counterpart, you can still manipulate it in place with a bit of pressure. So it's a great glue to use. Super glue, not so much. I know you can get the kind of the stuff which sets instantly, and then, you know, some that gives you a little bit of working time, but plastic cement is the best. And also it will help mold those two lines together, which is lovely. But we are going to sand it later. But you can see here, hopefully from that photo, from the top down, you can see that there is a tiny seam along there, and that's what we want. We're gonna accentuate that later on by sort of carving into it with a, I don't know, a little molding tool, or we might just use a little very thin file just to kind of put that edge so it looks like, you know, a piece of stone was put on top of a kind of the footing almost. So that's what we're going to go for with that. Does look good. Very pleased. There's a slight gap in it. Again, we'll fill that later, but it's pretty nice, I have to say. All right, now I'm not going to glue this down straight away because I think it might get knocked a little bit. So I'm just going to put it to one side. But I've got the PVA handy, and I'll use that as I start working up with the other pieces. Just going to give that a nice final tickle, the old 240. Yeah, and that's really nice. Great, so first bit done. Now we'll just work our way through and do the rest of the board. All right, we're ready for the first step. Now, I cut it the width of 2mm plasticard too big, so I had to go back and recut it. So, looking at orientation, we've got to put our step in first, our lower step in first. Then we put our next step up, and then that's what we use to measure for this. And you saw I just used my scalpel and just made an impression on the plasticard, and I use that to cut it out. So we're looking good here, and then what we'll have to do is we'll have to glue this front one on, then this top one, and then this bottom one, and then sand all that flat, and then we can then repeat the process with a slightly thinner sheet of plasticard and do the same and go from there. So it's a long process, but it will look really cool in the end, and it will give this lovely surface, and then we can really dig into it and texture it. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this front piece in, then I'm going to sand it flat, then I'll put this piece in, sand that flat, and then finally I'll put the top step on and get that nicely flatted to the front there. So yeah, a little bit tricky. You've got to get the orientation right before you commit to gluing stuff, and then we'll crack on with it. Oh. All right, took a long time to get there, but we got there in the end, which is great news. So all we need to do now is we need to cut this top bit. Now, if you remember, I drew a line along here. I'll get it in shot here. So that's the line where the building comes to, and then we're going to do a decorative design that side of it. And this line will be covered up by the physical building itself, plus a little bit of rock and sand and stuff. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to offer this up to make sure we've got the right amount of plasticard. This is the last sheet I've got, and if I cut this wrong, then it's game over. So I'm just trying to be really conscious about where my top step is. So I'm going to get rid of all these here and start sort of about there to make sure I've got plenty of room. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And obviously we've got this little bit at the end here which we can use this piece on. I'm quite happy with how that sits. I'm just going to try and just draw a line underneath it. I'm going to cut that line first. It's quite faint. Couldn't quite get the pencil, or the pen rather, in line, but we've got a rough line to work on. I'm going to cut just over that line a little bit, so if I need to trim it back later with a sander or sandpaper, I can do. Gosh, 2 mils really tough to cut. Okay. Try and get that in shot for you guys. So slight error on my part there. Okay, so I did make a tiny little error on this corner here, but I've now cleared it. So I've fixed my mistake. I just cut it slightly at the wrong angle, but now I'm really happy with the way the rest of it goes in. And now I'm just going to mark it on top with my blade like I have done before, like so, and again here. And I'll draw a line between those 2 points and I'll cut that. So it's quite an important cut here. If I mess this up, then I'm out of plasticard. So got to make sure it's right. So I'm going to draw my line and then I'm going to offer it back up to make sure I've got it right. To cut it wrong now would be absolutely fatal. Yeah, I'm really happy with that line. So big long cut like before. I'm going to give myself a little bit of breathing room, a couple of mil, and then we'll cut it. Okay, there it is. So this is my scrap bit. Bring this back. There we go. No, excuse me. There it goes. Had it the wrong way around. Okay. Okay. So I've got that beautifully lined up on this back edge and this square here. So actually, my mistake is okay. It's all right. It's not as bad as I thought it was. I'm just going to offer the front part up first. Yeah, and that all works more or less. Yeah, it does. Works brilliantly. Okay, good. There is a little bit of wiggle room there, so I can get my sander in. But all I know is that if I take my corner measurement here, or my corner, line it up along the edge here, then I've got the perfect amount of wiggle room left in the model. So that's great. But what I need to do, I need to quickly mark out where my line starts. And again, this will give me some wiggle room as well, because we can move, we're going to cut this in half and then we can move it forwards or backwards, because the building will take up the middle of it. So I've got it here. So this will fit on that line and then we can wiggle it forwards or backwards. So we've got plenty of give in this model. So I've drawn the first mark. You know, and it's always that classic, isn't it? Measure twice, cut once and all that. It's so true. And conveniently, I can see my line here, which is just there. Brilliant. And if we have a quick look on the top down, you can see that this bit here needs filling with a little bit of plasticard as well. But, you know, our building is going to be along here. It's going to be covered up by that big rubble bit at the end, and we'll fill it with a little bit of sand rock. So I'm not worried about doing plasticard on that tiny bit if it needs it. But as I said, I will just fill this end piece with a bit of plasticard, but it's not essential if we don't need it. But it's nice to have a little bit of wiggle room if we need it. Okay, and now I'm going to do this cut here. Or what we could do is we could carry this down actually. Let's just finish that. Let's just finish that cut there. There we go. We've got loads of room at the edge there, so that's perfect. So we'll keep that up here so we don't cut it and reuse it. That's for that piece there. Okay, and there it is cut. That's that done. So we know that goes on there. We've got a bit at the end which we've cut that will carry on, and then this bit we'll use to etch our design into using the CNC machine. Good stuff. All right, next process now is I've got to clean up all of these pieces of plasticard. And then, as you saw me at the beginning, I'll start gluing them in place. These bits here have glued really, really nicely. So what we'll do a quick sand, and then we'll offer up the first step just to make sure we're happy with how it all fits and looks. So again, we'll grab our little sanding block, and we'll just give the front edge a bit of a tickle. Oh yeah, a little bit of sandpaper on there really helps. I think the sanding block's a little bit too big with this on, so I'm just going to cut the paper off a little bit, just so I've got a little bit more maneuverability with it, because it was just getting in the way of holding all that sandpaper. So that's probably a lot better. I'll just bend that over there. Got to make your tools work for you, because you know, you're going to spend quite a long time sanding this model and getting it just how you want it. And now I'll just do the top step as well. Now I can feel that there's quite a lip in that step there, which is not good, because what it will do now, if I put my next step on it, because it's slightly higher, it will push the step up like that, which I don't want. So I'm going to use my little Games Workshop removal tool just to take off the a large section of it at a time, like a good, almost like a plane if you're planing wood. Yeah, and I can feel that's taken off loads. It is quite high here, so I'm just going to take my blade out of my knife here, and I'm just going to run it over the top just to take off even more material. Could do with a mini plane, actually. That would be really cool. I'm sure they probably do them. Great. You know, and I can feel that that glue, that PVA glue, has really stuck that that styrene to the front of that MDF front. I was getting a bit worried about it. I thought maybe it wasn't enough. I was going to have to epoxy it in, and you know, that's just an expensive glue and just more time. So I'm glad it's worked really nicely. So that's much better. I'm just going to take my sandpaper, a lot better, and I'm just going to clean the face of it up as well, just to deburr it a little bit more. Yeah, that is real nice. Now, it is a little bit janky here, so with that blade, I did cut a tiny bit too deep in there, but it's okay because, you know, we want it to look a little bit weathered, a little bit older, don't we? And when we push up that styrene against the front of that, it is absolutely perfect. So we're really happy with that. Obviously, we've got to put the back step in, and this will require just a really light sand just to get that flush. But other than that, we're looking really good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put all of these backstops in, sand them flat, and then I'll put the top step in. So plenty for me to get on with. There it is. So that took a while, but we got it in the end. You notice a couple of times I didn't follow my own rule of alternating the steps, so I went back and did that. All that we need to now is really let this glue set before I start sanding it again. So I'm just gonna sit tight and let it dry. I'm now going to glue this section in. So you've seen I spent quite a bit of time just sort of sanding those steps to make sure they're all level. And then I'm going to, before I add the top step, I'm just going to touch up these edges along here with a hand sander or a palm sander just to help me out. But I feel confident enough now that that I'm not going to knock this off. So I'm just going to glue it in place. Give it time to set, which is really important. Okay. It's pretty good. The glue on the edges have just needed to be touched up just a little bit because obviously with a bit of sanding and maybe the glue didn't adhere properly, but now they're all pretty much solid. I'm just checking the ends to make sure. There's a tiny gap here which I can just pop some PVA in and it squeezes shut, which is beautiful. All right, again, I'm gonna have to leave this to dry because I really want those edges to glue really tightly and then I'll come back and just sand the sides. Things are progressing. I'm still sanding and just making those final adjustments before I start putting the top step on. I'm fairly happy now with how the model is. It's pretty smooth. The last thing I'm going to do though before I lay the top step, which I think I mentioned before, is I'm just going to make these ends flush to the side of the model. And there's lots of ways I could do that. I could use my hobby saw, but if I do that, I put a lot of pressure on the little tabs here at the end. You can see that on the top down, these little bits that stick out. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably use my little hand sander. Yeah, as you saw there, had a little bit of tear out from these two pieces. The sander did a fantastic job, but it was just a bit too aggressive. So yeah, you can see that they've come away, but that's not a problem. We'll glue them back up and then we'll leave them to dry and we'll come back and start the rest of the steps. Now, you probably saw me fiddling around with this. Now, there's just been a slight miscalculation of the parts here. So again, you know, it happens. You try your best for it not to happen, but it just happens. So this isn't quite right. It was off by about 2 millimeters, which is a tiny amount, but it's just going to cause me a lot of work later on, and I'd rather just recut a piece. So as you saw me do, I offered it up, put a ruler on it and drew a straight edge. Got a bendy mat here at the moment. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to give myself, again, a bit of breathing space and just cut over the line, just so I'm not hampering my efforts. So I can always sand it back. Oh, this stuff is tough to cut. The old score and snap though, that works real well. Cool. Yeah, much better. Get rid of that. Dump that. And now we'll just offer this back up again. I'll get this on the top down if I can. There we go. We've got a much better match. It hangs over a tiny bit, but I'd rather have something to sand back than nothing, than have to fill it later. So that's all I've gone back and done, which is fine. It might seem like a pain, but it's all right. There we go. Bit of glue on there. Pop that on. That is the first kind of top step done. We've got our line, which we knew we were going to get, but we're going to reinforce that later and make a bit of a feature out of these kind of joins. So that's fine. I've got pretty much to the halfway point. It's kind of a bit further on, but for me, this is good enough to stop halfway. Uh, there's a couple of issues here, which is really key to point out. There is perhaps a little bit more overhang on these widths than I would have liked. So I think trimming these back later on is going to be quite difficult. However, I think once it's glued down, it should be strong enough for me to drag a knife across it or to sand it back. But, you know, if we have a quick look from the side, you know, there's probably 3 mil in some places to sand off, which is, I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit problematic. So that we've got to contend with that as well. So what I might do is I might just spend a bit of time just trying to sand up this base one, because I know this one's quite solid now. I spent quite a long time sorting these ones out. So I'm going to have a bit of a sand and then see where I am. The bottom step came up beautifully. It's really nice and flat and it's really smooth at the front there. So that, I'm really happy with that. And that's kind of the result I want to achieve from these side pieces. So I know that they're going to take a lot of sanding and a lot of trimming. So, you know, points to note is I could have trimmed them down a little bit better, and maybe I should have measured the width of each step and then cut it bespokely rather than sort of generically for each one. So this is going to cause me a few problems. However, I do think the result will be worth the perseverance, which obviously I'm going to have to go through, but that's okay. I'm willing to put in the effort, and not all of it needs trimming back so much. Cutting this stuff was a bit tricky. Well, that just popped off there as well. So maybe, you know, need a little bit of improvement there of cutting skills for this plasticard being quite thick. The other thing I don't want to do is I don't want to damage the step below it by scoring the front of that. So I might have to put sort of a sacrificial plate down just so I'm not digging into the lower step. But this will probably take me an hour or so to get these steps flat, and then I'll continue on. And by that time I get to the top step, the glue should be perfectly dry for each level. So I'll carry on. All right, a little bit painful, but it had a better effect than trying to sand it back. I know with all of that pressure that I've put on the board, it's peeled off a couple of these steps, so I've got to realign them really. So lesson learned here is that it's definitely the order I should have put these in. I should have thought a little bit more about it. So, you know, you live and learn. And like I said in the last one, you know, not every model build is perfect, you know, unless you're a professional model builder, you know, you're probably not going to make many mistakes if you are. But if you're just like a normal person like I am, then you're bound to make a few mistakes, right? Everything can't be perfect in life. Anyway, so that's my cover your ass clause, by the way. Oh, God. All right, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to let this glue fully cure now because obviously all that pressure is having a bit of an impact on it. But I've cut the fronts down quite a bit now and I'm really happy with how they look. They've definitely got a bit of waviness to them. And you know, ultimately when we come to putting damage on them and stuff, they won't look like a perfectly machined step. You know, they'll look like they've got a bit of age to them, which is no bad thing, you know, no bad thing at all. So I'm just going to trim a couple more of these fronts up. And then I'm going to leave it for a couple of hours and come back and then trim the rest off before I continue on with the next level. I've had some great success off camera just cleaning the edges up. Now, what I've used is I've used my Games Workshop scraper, which is really great, but I laid the model on its end. Hopefully you can see it's on the top down, and then I just used my finger as a bit of a brace and then just pulled down, and I can get a really good line of sight down the front of the model. And that has really helped to tidy those edges up loads. So they're all pretty much level now with the face of the step. I still need to do some more fettling, as it were. And I've also chopped this side of the base as well with a little hobby saw, and then give it a little sand with the little palm sander. So I'm just gonna cut off this side. I have started it already, but you'll be able to see from the top down. Quite lucky actually, this hobby saw is more or less the right length, which is great. I'm just going nice and gently. Which is great. You've also noticed as well, you may have noticed I had a bit of a tidy up because it was getting a bit wild. So it's because I was just switching between tools the whole time. And if I'm honest, that's how I work mainly. It's really messy and it's not conducive to to a good working environment. So I've tried to tidy up and be a bit more strict with it. So The only thing I really need to do now is I've just got to touch up these edges because where they sort of flare out towards the side of the piece. So they'll need a little bit more fettling. And then I'm just going to take my sanding block and some sandpaper out and just run it over the front of these steps. I am really pleased with how that's gone. I thought that was going to be a lot harder than it was, but you know, it just took a little bit of perseverance and it's come out all right. Now, it's worth noting that these are not absolutely 100% 90 degrees, 90 degrees. They're not perfect. But do you know what? It's not that bad because I think if they were perfect, it would look a little bit weird. You know, even the oldest buildings have got a little bit of wear and tear. So I'm really happy with that. And do you know what? They're not bad at all. Really happy with it. So I mentioned in the first video that the second video was going to be detailing, and I was going to clad the entire structure. I was going to glue the building on and do the detailing at the back here. Now, unfortunately, there's just been some stuff happening here in New Zealand, and I have to go and sort that out and get ready for that. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to spend as much time this week on this diorama as I would hope. So what I plan to do is I will finish cladding the rest of this building, the steps rather, and the building, and do the detail here. But I will film it all, but I'll just include it in the last episode, the third version, the third episode. So I'm really sorry about that. But sometimes, you know, just things happen and you just can't avoid it. And I've just got to go and deal with all that sort of stuff now. So I'm going to go away and do that. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I bet it's been a long one and it's just been me sanding and scraping the front of some plastic card. But I think the model is taking shape and it is looking fantastic, way better than I thought it was going to look, if I'm honest with you. So that's good. But I'm happy with its progression. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to finish it in this episode, but it will all be done in the last episode. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the final one.